All right, Mr. Hill, in New Hampshire, could you give us the story of that sighting?
Well, my wife and I were returning from Canada to New Hampshire in the evening when we saw what looked like a bright star in the heavens. It was the brightest star up there, and my wife remarked that the star had begun to move. And surprisingly, this, what I thought was a star, began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed. Well, this caused me to become quite alarmed. I did feel that there was something sinister, strange, unusual about the whole thing.
In 2007, the most comprehensive study of the Barney and Betty Hill abduction case was undertaken by authors Kathleen Marden and Stanton Friedman. The result was the nonfiction book Captured. Kathleen has spent years studying the evidence surrounding her aunt and uncle's fantastic story. As a social scientist, the mystery was one she had no choice but to follow.
I had a very good background as a social scientist and as Betty's niece, so I had firsthand knowledge of the case.
Betty was almost a mother to Kathleen, was a role model in a close way. That there wasn't anybody else that had the same close relationship with Betty.
My Aunt Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. My Uncle Barney worked for the post office.
Betty and Barney Hill were prominent in their local community in Portsmouth. I had met Betty and Barney in 1968 in Pittsburgh. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, this is a very sensational story after all.
They were very credible people, and also they had a good reputation.
I mean, these people were the salt of the earth, you know, and so their credibility, I think, is just outstanding.
Yeah, very simply, I believe their experience was real.
I had doubts about whether or not it was a physical abduction because no one had ever been abducted by a UFO as far as we knew.
It's the first abduction case to be taken seriously and reported openly. It's a milestone in ufological history. It encouraged other people to come forward.
For hundreds of years, strange saucer-shaped objects have been seen in the sky, but it was not until 1964 that the first public disclosure of alien abductions was made. The story would capture the attention of the world and inspire thousands to come forward in the decades to come.
I didn't believe them at first, but I saw how much it affected Barney. You know, he became an alcoholic over it. You know, it just really affected him emotionally that I realized, yes, something did happen because both of their, you know, their mental beings just changed. They turned into different people. Barney was turned into a very scared individual.
For me personally, I felt that perhaps it would have been easier if I could have said this was a fantasy. My aunt and uncle simply made a mistake. Then my family could just go on living, but I couldn't do that. I wanted to find out for myself if Betty and Barney had actually been abducted or if they had created and absorbed a fantasy that they retold through hypnosis. Stanton Friedman is a nuclear physicist and scientific ufologist, probably the best known in the world.
I shoot hard. I'm not an apologist ufologist. I tell it like it is. I have a low tolerance for stupidity. I mean, there's still people who think the world is flat. You know, there's a flat Earth society. And there are still some people who believe we haven't been to the moon. I know that the public is ready, willing, and able to listen to factual information. Kathy knew that I had been involved early on, so it seemed a natural thing to get together and to rebut the many stupid arguments that were being made and help validate the Hill case.
Betty and Barney observed the craft right in front of this mountain to the west of us.
Kathy and Stanton returned to the White Mountains, retracing the journey that the Hills described under hypnosis and discussing the case with some of the early investigators.
He said the Air Force is keeping secrets. Remember, he was a member of MJ Cloud. Project Blue Book, Special Report 14.
We continued driving south, and my wife would occasionally remark that this object was still following us. And finally, my wife became very upset. She said, "Look, right overhead." And this object now was very extremely close, so I came to a complete stop, got out of the car, and I took the binoculars, began walking across the highway, looking up at the object with the binoculars, putting them down, shaking my head, saying, "Well, this just can't be true. I don't believe it." After we arrived home, well, we decided we wouldn't mention this to anyone, that it was too ridiculous, too absurd for us to believe.
They realized that they had arrived home in Portsmouth later than anticipated. They actually had arrived at daybreak.
Betty and Barney were obviously disturbed when they got home. They weren't quite sure why. Something strange had happened. And there are several peculiarities that they took note of. One was Barney's shoes were badly scuffed.
Betty's dress was torn from waist to hemline on the right side.
Their watches had stopped. Now, that sounds like a trivial thing, but when both watches stopped...
Several days after the UFO encounter, Betty had a series of dreams or nightmares about an abduction by aliens in this UFO.
The Hills would be haunted by the UFO encounter and 2 hours of missing time for more than 2 years. Betty's nightmares persisted, and Barney began to develop debilitating health problems.
I do believe that Barney was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. He had all of the symptoms.
Desperate to recover their memories of what happened in those 2 hours of missing time, the Hills began to seek help.
In November of 1962, at the rectory of the Unitarian Church in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, this couple came up to me, and they told me their story, and then they had this blank spot in their memories, and asked if hypnosis was useful to recover lost periods of memory. And I said yes. That's one of the classical uses of clinical hypnosis. They needed to find a competent psychologist or psychiatrist who used hypnotherapy.
Betty and Barney were referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon, and in February of 1964, Barney had his first hypnotic regression.
This isn't a parlor hypnotist. This is a man who had treated thousands, literally, of shell-shock war veterans from World War II. And his expertise was in breaking through the barriers to recovering repressed memories.
Yes, go on. You remember it now?
You are distressed, but you will remember everything, and you will tell me everything. Yes.
Can't I saw the men in the road?
Men in the road?
I've never been so afraid in my life.
Tell me about the men in the road.
These men started to come up to the car, and they opened the car door. There's a couple of men behind me, and then there's Barney, and there's a man on each side of him. And my eyes are open. My body's still asleep. He's walking and he's asleep. Barney.
The terrifying story that would unravel during the hypnosis sessions has since become familiar. Experiencing some form of telepathic mind control, the Hills are taken aboard a craft and examined as specimens. Unusual medical instruments are used to perform painful procedures. The couple then have their memories erased.